It was just another Saturday afternoon, clippers buzzing, laughter filling the air, until three white men walked into that neighborhood barbershop and started mocking the quiet black man in the corner chair. They didn't know who he was. They didn't know what those scars on his knuckles meant, and they sure didn't know what the barber knew, that this man wasn't just another customer. He was undefeated in 40 fights. What happened next would turn that small-town shop into a national story, a moment of respect, reckoning, and reality. If you believe in dignity, justice, and the truth that strength doesn't always shout, hit like, subscribe, and stay with me. Because this story, you'll feel it long after it's over. The clippers hummed low, steady, that hypnotic sound that made every barbershop feel like its own heartbeat. Outside, the afternoon sun spilled through the big glass window, warming the checkered tile floor. Inside, men laughed, argued, told stories too wild to be true. But in one corner chair, silence cut through the noise. A tall black man sat there, calm, shoulders broad, eyes lowered. His presence didn't demand attention. It commanded it quietly. His hands, scarred and strong, rested on his knees. He wasn't new here, but no one really knew him. He came every few weeks. Same seat, same cut. Never said more than he needed to. Then the door chimed. 3 white men walked in, loud laughing, carrying that easy arrogance that said they weren't here for a haircut. They were here to be seen. Their voices echoed sharp, breaking the rhythm of the shop. Everyone turned. Afternoon, the barber said, trying to keep it casual, but his smile faltered. He'd seen that type before, the kind who tested patience for sport. They took seats along the wall, watching, whispering. Then came the snickers, the smirks. One of them pointed at the quiet man in the chair, said something low, but ugly enough that the laughter from the others turned heads. The mood in the room shifted, a slow tension building under the hum of the clippers. The man in the chair didn't move. He didn't flinch. He just stared ahead at his reflection, still unreadable. The barber's hands hesitated for half a second before continuing the fade, the blade trembling slightly. Outside, a car passed. Inside, silence thickened. One of the men, tallest, built like a linebacker, stood up, pacing behind the chairs. His boots thudded against the tile, each step deliberate. He leaned close, said something meant to provoke, meant to humiliate, the kind of words that left no doubt what he thought of the man in the mirror. The air cracked. Everyone waited for a reaction, but none came. Not a word, not a twitch. Just quiet, controlled breathing. The kind that came from someone who'd been here before, not in a barbershop, but in 100 moments just like it, each one testing how far dignity could stretch before it broke. Then the barber, an older man with eyes that had seen too much, looked up from his work. His expression changed. What he said next would stop the laughter cold. But that moment hadn't come yet. Right now, all that existed was tension, the kind that lives in your chest and makes every second feel longer than it should, the kind that tells you something is about to happen, and when it does, it'll change everything inside that shop. The barbershop sat on the corner of a quiet street, the kind of place that hadn't changed much in 20 years. The paint on the outside walls peeled in strips, and the red-white-blue pole by the door spun slow, tired from years of service. Inside, the smell was familiar, aftershave, talc, clippers warming under steady hands. It was the kind of space where boys became men, where stories grew with each retelling, and where truth was often spoken in whispers between fades. That Saturday morning had started like any other. Old jazz hummed from a dusty speaker. A few regulars waited their turn, reading newspapers or pretending to. The barber, known simply as Harris, had been running this place for 3 decades. His hands were steady even when the world outside wasn't. He'd seen everything. Good men fall, bad men change, and young ones trying to find who they were between the lines of a haircut and a hard truth. Then came Malik. He'd been coming in for nearly a year now. Always quiet, always respectful. Mid-30s, tall, lean but powerful. The kind of man who carried silence like a weapon. His clothes were simple, black t-shirt, jeans, clean boots. He wore a faded gym bag slung over his shoulder, the kind that hinted at long hours and discipline, not vanity. Most folks assumed he worked security somewhere, maybe military, maybe private contractor. But no one asked. There was something in his eyes that said don't. They were sharp but heavy, the kind of eyes that had seen things that don't leave easy. He always tipped Harris well and never lingered after. His seat, the third chair by the window, had become his spot. And in time, even without words, everyone in that shop respected the quiet gravity he brought with him. But respect isn't always contagious. That morning, Harris's nephew Dre was sweeping the floor when he spotted the three men across the street. He'd seen them before, loud, drunk sometimes, always looking for trouble. They worked construction nearby, and when the bars closed early or the heat got to their heads, they'd wander in looking for an audience. When they stepped through the door that day, the air shifted. They brought with them that kind of laughter that doesn't belong. Too sharp, too knowing. One of them, Rick, had a shaved head and a smirk carved deep into his face. Another, Cole, wore sleeveless flannel, tattoos running down his arms like bad decisions he couldn't erase. The third, Jared, was the biggest, shoulders broad, voice loud enough to fill a room even when no one asked him to. They didn't come for a haircut. They came for attention. And in a barbershop full of black men, they thought they'd find it. At first, it was small things. A comment about the music. A laugh about the smell of too much oil. Then came the looks. That exaggerated glance toward Malik in the mirror. He didn't meet their eyes. Didn't have to. Harris tried to redirect the mood. Fellas, you here for a cut, or just keeping cool from the heat? Rick grinned. Just looking around. Don't get to see this side of town too often. That one sentence, soft, harmless on the surface, carried the weight of every insult that doesn't need to be said out loud. Dre froze mid-sweep. Harris's clippers paused for just a second. Then laughter. Forced. Nervous. Malik didn't move. His reflection stared back, still and calm. There was something about his posture, relaxed but ready, that made even Jared hesitate before leaning closer. He muttered something under his breath, something about tough guys and wrong side of the line. Malik's jaw tightened once. Then he exhaled, slow, deliberate. He wasn't new to provocation, not by a long shot. Long before he walked into this shop, he'd lived a dozen lifetimes inside a ring. He'd fought under lights so bright they burned. In the military, he'd been undefeated, 40 fights, 40 wins, all clean, all controlled. But after his final match, after too many concussions and too much loss, he walked away, quietly, left behind the noise, the fame, the whispers, came home to find peace, if peace was still something he could recognize. The barbershop was his sanctuary, the one place where no one asked him about medals or victories, just how he wanted his fade lined up. But now that peace was cracking. Harris glanced at him in the mirror, a silent question in his eyes. You good? Malik gave a small nod. But Dre wasn't. He was young, barely 20, all energy and pride. Man, y'all need to chill, he muttered under his breath. The three men turned. Jared laughed, stepping closer. The sound of his boots on the floor made everyone sit up a little straighter. The other customers, two older men by the back and a father with his teenage son, exchanged wary glances. They'd seen this movie before. The setup was always the same. Provocation, silence, escalation. Harris cleared his throat. Ain't no trouble here, right? Rick raised his hands, grinning. No trouble. Just talking. But the smirk on his face said otherwise. Malik's eyes stayed fixed on his reflection. The barber's hands moved slower now, deliberate. Every snip of the scissors felt louder. He could feel it, the energy shifting. The room closing in. It wasn't fear. It was focus. Because men like him didn't react out of anger. They measured, calculated. They let the world throw its punches first. And somewhere inside that quiet, Harris felt it too. That strange duality of calm and storm. Outside, the light dimmed as a cloud passed. Inside, Malik's gaze hardened just slightly, enough for anyone paying attention to notice. The laughter faded. The teasing stopped. But the tension remained. By the time Harris finished the cut, No one had said a word for minutes. The silence felt like glass, fragile, ready to shatter. Malik stood, brushed stray hairs from his shoulders, and reached for his wallet. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low, controlled. "How much?" "On the house," Harris said quietly. Malik nodded, placed a few bills on the counter anyway, and turned to leave. But just before he reached the door, Jared muttered something under his breath, something cruel, sharp, meant to follow him out like a stain. Malik stopped, turned slowly, the kind of turn that carried weight. Everyone in the shop froze. He didn't speak, didn't raise his voice, just looked at the man, a look that made even laughter die. And in that stillness, something unspoken passed between them. Jared's grin faltered. His posture shifted, almost imperceptibly. For the first time, the air of control slipped from his shoulders. Malik didn't need to do anything more. He simply walked out. The bell above the door chimed once, clear, final. The sound lingered even after he was gone. Inside, the shop was quiet again, but the peace was gone. Because everyone there knew that wasn't the end. That was just the calm before something much bigger. And by the next day, the whole town would know who Malik really was. The morning after the incident at the barbershop, the air in town felt heavier, like it was holding its breath. News travels differently in small towns. It doesn't need headlines or microphones. It travels through whispers, glances, and the half-truths shared at gas stations and diners. By noon, half the neighborhood already knew about the 3 white men who had walked into Harris's barbershop and left humiliated, though the truth, as always, depended on who you asked. To some, Malik had stared them down, intimidated honest folks just trying to talk. To others, those men had crossed a line, and were lucky they didn't get flattened where they stood. Either way, the story had taken on a life of its own. Malik didn't care. He'd seen how gossip burns fast, but dies faster. What worried him wasn't what people were saying. It was what came next. Because men like those 3 didn't take embarrassment well. Especially not in front of an audience. Especially not when the one who made them look small was a black man. By evening, Malik had settled into his usual rhythm. Morning runs through the park, light sparring at the gym, then home. His world was simple by design, built to keep peace where chaos once lived. But that peace was already cracking. When he stepped into the gym that afternoon, he noticed a shift right away. The air was tense, conversations hushed. A few regulars avoided eye contact. Even the trainer, Marcus, usually loud and welcoming, gave him a brief nod instead of a grin. Malik didn't ask. He didn't need to. The whispers said enough. At the far end of the gym, 2 of the same men from the barbershop stood near the lockers, Rick and Jared. Their laughter echoed, too forced, too loud. When Malik passed, they quieted, pretending to stretch. But their eyes followed him, mocking, testing. He ignored them, wrapped his hands, shadowboxed a few rounds, tried to keep his mind where it belonged, on form, breath, rhythm. But it was impossible to shake the feeling that something ugly was brewing. Because racism never dies quietly. It waits. It plots. It grows bold when it thinks no one's watching. And that night, it decided to show its face. Around 8 p.m., Malik left the gym. The air was cool, the streets mostly empty. His car was parked under a flickering light, the kind that buzzed louder than it shone. As he approached, he saw it, a message scrawled across his windshield in red spray paint. Go back. 2 words. That's all. But they cut deeper than any punch he'd ever taken. He stood there for a long time, staring at them, jaw tight, hands steady. He'd seen that kind of message before, in overseas bases, in locker rooms, on bathroom walls. Always from cowards. Always at night. But this time it wasn't some stranger's hate. It was local. It was personal. He didn't call the police. He didn't tell Harris. He just cleaned it off. Silent. Controlled. Because anger, once it starts, has a way of burning down more than just what's deserved. But inside, something was shifting. The next day, he didn't go to the barbershop. He didn't want to bring that kind of trouble to Harris's doorstep. But trouble doesn't need an invitation. By late morning, Harris called him anyway. His voice was tight, worried. They came back, he said simply. Malik was already grabbing his keys before the sentence ended. When he pulled up, 3 police cars were parked out front. The front window of the barbershop was cracked, a small spiderweb of broken glass, just enough to send a message. The red-white-blue pole had been snapped clean off its base, lying on the sidewalk like a broken promise. Harris stood by the door, arms crossed, face calm but eyes burning. Dre was pacing. The cops were talking, taking notes, pretending to care. Malik approached quietly. "Security cameras?" he asked. "Broken," Harris said. "They cut the wires." Of course they did. The officers shrugged, one of them scribbling lazily in his notebook. "Could have been kids," he said. Malik looked at him, not with anger, just with the kind of cold disbelief that says you don't even believe that yourself. "Kids don't cut wires," he said flatly. The officer met his gaze for half a second, then looked away. "We'll file a report. That's all we can do." And just like that, they left. Dre kicked the wall. "Man, this is bull." "Enough," Harris said, voice low but firm. "They want a reaction. Don't give it to them." But Malik wasn't reacting. He was remembering. The paint, the looks, the laughter, the silence, all of it. Later that day, as he helped Harris tape up the broken glass, a car slowed down out front. The window rolled down just enough for Malik to see a familiar grin. Rick. He lifted a can of beer toward him, like a toast, before driving off. That was all it took. The next morning, Malik woke before dawn, went for a run that turned into a sprint, that turned into a battle with his own restraint. Every step, every breath. He replayed the moment he walked into that shop, the way those men looked at him like he was a joke, the way they laughed at Dre, the way they smirked at Harris. He'd spent years learning control, military discipline, mental endurance. But there's a difference between control and silence, and sometimes silence only feeds the beast. By noon, he was sitting outside the barbershop again. Harris looked up from inside, surprised. "You sure you want to be here?" Malik nodded. "Yeah, time to stop running." Business was slow that day. The regulars came and went, cautious, quiet. Dre swept, humming low to fill the silence. Harris worked like always, steady hands, steady heart. But everyone was waiting, because word was out that the same 3 men, talking big across town, that they had unfinished business on the east side. And sometime around 3 p.m., the bell over the barbershop door rang again. They walked in like they owned the place. Same swagger, same smirks. Jared went first this time. Bigger, louder. His boots hit the floor like he wanted to be heard. Rick followed, chewing gum, ice cold. Cole lingered by the door, hands tucked in his pockets. The room went still. Harris's clippers stopped mid-fade. Dre's broom froze in place. Malik didn't move. He was sitting in the same chair as last time, third by the window. His eyes met theirs in the mirror. Calm, still, but this time, there was no silence behind that calm. There was intent. They stood there, waiting for him to flinch, to blink, to back down. But he didn't. Seconds stretched. You could hear the hum of the lights, the faint buzz of the old ceiling fan, the heartbeat of a room that knew something irreversible was coming. Then, Rick stepped forward, pretending to laugh. "Man, relax. We're just here for a cut, right, boys?" But no one believed him. Malik rose slowly. Not aggressive, not defensive, just deliberate. The room shrank around him. He stood a few feet away now, not close enough to threaten, but close enough that they could feel it. And that's when Harris finally spoke. His voice was quiet, measured. "You know who he is." Rick smirked. "Yeah, some wannabe tough guy, right?" But Harris didn't smile. He didn't even blink. "He's undefeated," he said softly. 40 fights. Not one man made it past round 2. The silence that followed wasn't shock. It was disbelief trying to find an exit. Rick's grin faltered. Cole looked uneasy. Even Jared, big, loud Jared, took a half-step back. Malik didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Because suddenly, every scar, every inch of muscle, every quiet moment made sense. The man they'd mocked wasn't some random gym rat. He was a soldier. A fighter. A man who'd faced worse than any of them ever would. And now he was standing right in front of them, not to fight, but to remind them what restraint looks like in human form. Harris's voice broke the silence again, firmer this time. Now, unless you're here for a haircut, I suggest you leave. The men hesitated. You could see the war inside them, pride versus fear. Rick's jaw worked. He wanted to say something, to salvage what little ego he had left, but the words died before they reached his mouth. Instead, they turned, one by one. When the door finally shut behind them, the entire room exhaled. Dre muttered under his breath, "Man, that was crazy." But Harris didn't answer. He just stared at Malik, proud, relieved, and maybe a little scared, because while the confrontation had ended quietly, something bigger had begun. Outside, the story was already spreading. Not the one about vandalism or tension, but about that moment. The moment three men realized that the man they'd mocked wasn't someone to underestimate. By evening, the video surfaced, grainy security footage from across the street. Someone had been filming through the shop window. The clip went viral before sunset. The caption read, "Thugs tried to mess with a black man at a barbershop. Found out he's undefeated in 40 fights." Millions watched. Millions shared. And for once, the internet got the story right. But for Malik, it wasn't about views. It was about control. The kind that doesn't come from fear or power, but from knowing when not to fight. He hadn't thrown a single punch, yet he'd won something bigger. Still, deep down, he knew it wasn't over, because humiliation cuts deep, and men like those don't forgive being made to look small. The peace that returned to that barbershop was fragile, temporary, the kind that comes right before a storm. And Malik, calm, quiet, undefeated, could already feel thunder rolling somewhere just beyond the horizon. For 3 days after the video went viral, the town felt like it was holding its breath again. Only this time, for entirely different reasons. The clip of Malik standing face to face with those three men had exploded online. Millions of views, thousands of comments, some cheering him on, others twisting the story, claiming he'd threatened white customers, that he was using his military past to intimidate civilians. Truth had once again become optional, and while Harris's barbershop suddenly had people lining up around the block, the attention came with eyes that watched too closely. Cops driving slower past the shop, unfamiliar cars idling nearby, reporters sniffing around for a headline. But what unsettled Malik most wasn't the noise outside. It was the silence inside. He hadn't heard from the three men. Not a word. Not a sighting. No vandalism, no confrontations. Just quiet. And Malik knew. In men like that, silence was never peace. It was planning. By Thursday evening, Harris tried to lighten the mood. The shop was nearly empty. Just the low hum of the clippers, the soft crackle of the radio. "Man," Harris said with a chuckle, "you got famous faster than anyone I ever cut hair for." Malik gave a small smile. Didn't ask for it. "Nobody asks for a spotlight," Harris replied. "It just finds you. Question is, what do you do when it's shining?" Malik didn't answer. He was staring out the window, eyes distant. The streets were quiet, too quiet. Dre looked up from sweeping. "You think they'll come back?" Malik's tone was calm, but his gaze was sharp. "They already have." At 9:17 that night, Malik's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Then he read the message. "You think this is over? You embarrassed the wrong people. Watch your back, soldier." He stared at it for a long time. Not out of fear, but calculation. He'd received threats before. Overseas. Stateside. But this one felt personal. Local. Dangerous. He didn't tell Harris or Dre. He just forwarded the message to an old contact, Sergeant Owens, retired MP, who still had strings in law enforcement. Then he waited. By morning, Owens called back. "Malik, you're dealing with something bigger than 3 drunk rednecks," he said grimly. "One of them, Rick, he's connected. His brother's a deputy. His cousin runs with a local patriot group. You push, they'll push back harder." Malik exhaled slowly. "They already have." Friday night. Malik was home, sitting at the kitchen table, the light of his laptop flickering across his face. He'd pulled up security footage from a small camera he'd installed outside his house years ago. At first, nothing. Just wind. Shadows. Then movement. 3 figures. Hoods up. Moving across the yard. One of them carrying a can. Another holding something metallic. Gasoline. He didn't panic. He didn't even move. He just reached for his phone, hit record, and quietly dialed 911. 3 men, he said evenly, attempting to vandalize my property, possibly armed. The dispatcher asked him to stay inside. He didn't argue, but he didn't hide either. By the time the sirens approached, the men were already gone, the faint smell of fuel lingering in the air, a half-empty can left behind by the porch. The cops took statements, measured footprints, promised extra patrols. But Malik could see it in their eyes. They weren't going to do much. Not in this town. Not against those names. When they left, he stood outside for a long while, watching the lights fade down the road. Then he looked at the porch, the little gas stain near the steps, and whispered to himself, "Okay, no more warnings." Saturday came with gray skies and restless air. The barbershop opened as usual, but something in Harris's face told Malik he already knew. Word spreads fast, especially bad news. "They hit your place, huh?" Harris said quietly. Malik nodded. "You call it in?" "Yeah. They gonna do anything?" Malik's silence was the answer. Harris sighed. "Then we handle it our way." But Malik shook his head. "No, we don't stoop. We stay visible. Calm. They want chaos. We show control." It wasn't fear speaking. It was strategy. Because Malik knew what most people don't. That power doesn't come from shouting louder. It comes from standing taller, even when they're trying to knock you down. That night, though, the line between control and confrontation finally snapped. It was just after 10 p.m. when Malik heard the crunch of tires outside his house again. This time, no hoods. No sneaking. Headlights cut across his yard. Music blasting. 3 men laughing. Rick, Jared, Cole. They weren't hiding anymore. Malik stepped outside, calm as ever. No gun. No weapon. Just presence. "Evening," he said, voice level. Rick leaned out the window. "Heard you've been talking a lot, soldier boy." Malik didn't answer. Just watched. Jared sneered. "You think you're some kind of hero, huh? Getting us fired, making us look bad online." Malik took a slow step forward. "You made yourselves look bad." That quiet truth hit harder than any insult. Rick's grin vanished. He threw open the car door, stormed toward Malik, beer bottle in hand. "Say that again." Malik didn't move. "Go home." Rick raised the bottle like a weapon. And then the sound. A faint click from across the yard. It wasn't Malik. It was Sergeant Owens, standing by his truck, phone in one hand, pistol holstered but visible. "Evening, boys," he said calmly. "I'd think twice about that next move. Sheriff's on his way." The men froze. Jared muttered a curse, grabbed Rick by the arm, and pulled him back toward the truck. Cole hesitated, eyes darting between Malik and Owens, then climbed in too. They peeled out, tires screeching. Owens exhaled, shaking his head. "Told you they'd escalate." Malik nodded. "Yeah, but now it's documented." By morning, the video was online again, this time from Owens's dashcam. 3 men harassing a decorated veteran on his property. And this time, the backlash was swift. Reporters descended. Local news ran the clip under the headline, "Army veteran harassed by locals in alleged racial incident." The sheriff's office, under pressure, opened an investigation. Within days, Rick and Jared were arrested for trespassing and intimidation. Cole turned himself in. The town erupted. Protests outside the courthouse, rallies at the barbershop, strangers dropping by to shake Malik's hand. But fame wasn't what he felt. It was exhaustion. He'd fought enough battles in his life. This one felt heavier because it wasn't fought with fists. It was fought with dignity, with patience. A week later, Malik sat on the barbershop porch with Harris and Dre. The chaos had settled. The air was calm again. Dre leaned forward. You really think they're done? Malik looked out at the street, kids riding bikes, cars passing by, life returning. They're done, he said softly. But the fight isn't. Harris nodded. No, it never really is. They sat in silence for a while. The sun dipped low, bathing the street in warm gold. Harris finally spoke. You know, when I was younger, I used to think standing up for yourself meant shouting louder than the man trying to silence you. But he paused. You did it without raising your voice. Malik smiled faintly. That's because real power doesn't need volume, just truth. That night, Malik finally allowed himself to rest. He sat in his living room, metals glinting faintly on the wall, the house finally quiet. He opened his phone to a flood of messages, news interviews, podcasts, talk shows. Everyone wanted to hear his side, but he only replied to one, a message from a young man who wrote, Sir, I saw what you did. I've been scared to stand up where I live, but you showed me how. Thank you. Malik read it twice, smiled softly, and typed back. Never confuse silence with weakness. Sometimes peace is the loudest thing you can do. Weeks passed. Rick, Jared, and Cole each took plea deals. Community service. Fines. The usual. But something else happened. Something no court order could have forced. People started talking differently in town. Not perfectly. Not always kindly. But honestly. The barbershop became a gathering place, not just for haircuts, but for hard conversations. And Malik, he stayed quiet as always. Still ran at dawn. Still kept to himself. Still showed up every Friday to get his fade trimmed by Harris, same as before. But every now and then, a stranger would walk in. Someone from out of town, maybe someone who'd seen the video, and shake his hand. And every time, Malik would give the same humble answer. I didn't fight them. I just didn't let them win. Months later, one last thing happened. Malik received a letter from the army. A commendation. Recognition for upholding the values of honor and integrity under public scrutiny. He placed it in a drawer beside his medals. Then he went for a run. As he jogged through the park, he noticed a new mural on the wall near the rec center. A painting of a black man standing tall, calm, composed, while chaos swirled around him. Underneath, in white paint, were the words, "Dignity is the loudest form of resistance." He stopped, smiled, exhaled, because for the first time in years, Malik felt something that didn't come from victory or vengeance, but from peace. In the end, Malik didn't need to fight his way to justice. He simply refused to fall. And sometimes, that's the greatest kind of strength there is. So if you believe calm is stronger than hate, if you believe silence can still roar, then hit like, subscribe, and stay with me. Because stories like this aren't just about what happened. They're about what still needs to. The barbershop opened as usual, but something in Harris's face told Malik he already knew. Word spreads fast, especially bad news. They hit your place, huh? Harris said quietly. Malik nodded. You call it in? Yeah. They gonna do anything? Malik's silence was the answer. Harris sighed. Then we handle it our way. But Malik shook his head. No, we don't stoop. We stay visible. Calm. They want chaos. We show control. It wasn't fear speaking. It was strategy. Because Malik knew what most people don't. That power doesn't come from shouting louder. It comes from standing taller, even when they're trying to knock you down. That night, though, the line between control and confrontation finally snapped. It was just after 10 p.m. when Malik heard the crunch of tires outside his house again. This time, no hoods. No sneaking. Headlights cut across his yard. Music blasting. 3 men laughing. Rick, Jared, Cole. They weren't hiding anymore. Malik stepped outside, calm as ever. No gun. No weapon. Just presence. Evening, he said, voice level. Rick leaned out the window. Heard you've been talking a lot, soldier boy. Malik didn't answer. Just watched. Jared sneered. You think you're some kind of hero, huh? Getting us fired, making us look bad online. Malik took a slow step forward. You made yourselves look bad. That quiet truth hit harder than any insult. Rick's grin vanished. He threw open the car door, stormed toward Malik, beer bottle in hand. Say that again. Malik didn't move. Go home. Rick raised the bottle like a weapon. And then the sound. A faint click from across the yard. It wasn't Malik. It was Sergeant Owens, standing by his truck, phone in one hand, pistol holstered but visible. Evening, boys, he said calmly. I'd think twice about that next move. Sheriff's on his way. The men froze. Jared muttered a curse, grabbed Rick by the arm, and pulled him back toward the truck. Cole hesitated, eyes darting between Malik and Owens, then climbed in two. They peeled out, tires screeching. Owens exhaled, shaking his head. Told you they'd escalate. Malik nodded. Yeah, but now it's documented. By morning, the video was online again, this time from Owens's dashcam. 3 men harassing a decorated veteran on his property. And this time, the backlash was swift. Reporters descended. Local news ran the clip under the headline, Army veteran harassed by locals in alleged racial incident. The sheriff's office, under pressure, opened an investigation. Within days, Rick and Jared were arrested for trespassing and intimidation. Cole turned himself in. The town erupted. Protests outside the courthouse, rallies at the barbershop, strangers dropping by to shake Malik's hand. But fame wasn't what he felt. It was exhaustion. He'd fought enough battles in his life. This one felt heavier because it wasn't fought with fists. It was fought with dignity, with patience. A week later, Malik sat on the barbershop porch with Harris and Dre. The chaos had settled. The air was calm again. Dre leaned forward. You really think they're done? Malik looked out at the street, kids riding bikes, cars passing by, life returning. They're done, he said softly. But the fight isn't. Harris nodded. No, it never really is. They sat in silence for a while. The sun dipped low, bathing the street in warm gold. Harris finally spoke. You know, when I was younger, I used to think standing up for yourself meant shouting louder than the man trying to silence you. But you, he paused. You did it without raising your voice. Malik smiled faintly. That's because real power doesn't need volume, just truth. That night, Malik finally allowed himself to rest. He sat in his living room, metals glinting faintly on the wall, the house finally quiet. He opened his phone to a flood of messages, news interviews, podcasts, talk shows. Everyone wanted to hear his side, but he only replied to one, a message from a young man who wrote, Sir, I saw what you did. I've been scared to stand up where I live, but you showed me how. Thank you. Malik read it twice, smiled softly, and typed back. Never confuse silence with weakness. Sometimes peace is the loudest thing you can do. Weeks passed. Rick, Jared, and Cole each took plea deals. Community service. Fines. The usual. But something else happened. Something no court order could have forced. People started talking differently in town. Not perfectly. Not always kindly. But honestly. The barbershop became a gathering place. Not just for haircuts, but for hard conversations. And Malik, he stayed quiet as always. Still ran at dawn. Still kept to himself. Still showed up every Friday to get his fade trimmed by Harris. Same as before. But every now and then, a stranger would walk in. Someone from out of town. Maybe someone who'd seen the video. And shake his hand. And every time, Malik would give the same humble answer. I didn't fight them. I just didn't let them win. Months later, one last thing happened. Malik received a letter from the Army. A commendation. Recognition for upholding the values of honor and integrity under public scrutiny. He placed it in a drawer beside his medals. Then he went for a run. As he jogged through the park, he noticed a new mural on the wall near the rec center. A painting of a black man standing tall, calm, composed, while chaos swirled around him. Underneath, in white paint, were the words, "Dignity is the loudest form of resistance." He stopped, smiled, exhaled, because for the first time in years, Malik felt something that didn't come from victory or vengeance, but from peace. In the end, Malik didn't need to fight his way to justice. He simply refused to fall. And sometimes, That's the greatest kind of strength there is. So if you believe calm is stronger than hate, if you believe silence can still roar, then hit like, subscribe, and stay with me. Because stories like this aren't just about what happened. They're about what still needs to. He looked around for a long moment before speaking. You all probably saw the video, he said quietly. You saw the anger, the tension, the moment when everything could have gone wrong. He paused. The silence was heavy, but not hostile. What you didn't see, he continued, was the part after. The part where you have to live with the choices you make. The moment when hate tries to drag you down to its level, and you have to decide, do I rise, or do I return it? His voice deepened slightly. See, control isn't weakness. It's strength under fire. And sometimes, the loudest victory you'll ever win is the one nobody claps for. The students were quiet. Not the bore kind of quiet, but the kind where hearts lean in. Malik smiled faintly. I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes. But that night, I learned something. You don't defeat hate by mirroring it. You defeat it by outlasting it. When he finished, the applause started slow, almost cautious. Then it grew. Loud. Real. Harris was standing near the back, grinning proudly. That day sparked something. Invitations followed, community centers, churches, even local police academies. Malik didn't turn them all down. He chose carefully, speaking where it mattered most. And each time, he told the story the same way, not as a victim or a hero, but as a man who made a choice. He always ended with the same words. Dignity is not silence. It's self-respect in motion. At the barbershop, life returned to rhythm. Clippers buzzed, laughter filled the air, and sunlight streaked through the blinds, cutting across the mirrors like golden film reels. Dre had become a full-time barber by then, sharper lines, smoother fades, but still the same kid who'd once asked Malik if he thought they'd come back. He didn't ask that anymore. One slow afternoon, Harris looked around and said, You know what's funny? They used to talk about the incident every day. Now they talk about what you said last week. Malik smiled. That's how change happens. Quietly. That night, Malik walked home alone under a deep purple sky. The town lights glowed softly against the horizon. He passed by the mural, the one of the calm man standing amid chaos. Someone had added a small note under the painted words. It said, To Malik for standing taller than hate. He stopped, touched the edge of the wall gently, like greeting an old friend, then kept walking. Back home, the house was warm and still. His daughter, the one who'd watched the viral storm from afar, worried but proud, was visiting for the weekend. She was in her early 20s now, studying journalism, her voice sharp and clear like her father's restraint made visible. Dad, she said from the couch, you know you've basically become a folk hero, right? Malik laughed. Folk heroes don't pay their own light bills. She grinned. Still, you did something rare. You changed a town without shouting once. He looked at her, eyes soft with pride. Maybe that's what real fighting looks like. Changing hearts without breaking them. She nodded. You think it lasts? He thought for a long moment before answering. If we keep showing up, yeah. Later that night, after she'd gone to bed, Malik sat alone in the living room. The TV was off. Only the soft hum of the refrigerator filled the air. He glanced at his reflection in the window, older, wiser, the weight of battles behind his eyes, but peace resting on his shoulders. He thought about all the noise that used to fill his life. The insults, the threats, the headlines. Now there was just quiet. And for once, it didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like victory. Months later, during a spring afternoon, Harris hosted a small community event outside the shop. Food, music, laughter. Nothing fancy. Just neighbors being neighbors again. Malik stood off to the side, arms folded, watching kids run past with sticky fingers and smiles. Harris came over, carrying 2 cups of lemonade. Hard to believe, huh? What's that? Malik asked. That piece came out of that mess. Malik nodded. That's the thing about storms. They show you who built a house on rock. Harris laughed. You and your quotes, man. "Hey," Malik said with a half-smile. "Wisdom's cheaper than therapy." They both laughed, but under it was something sacred, the kind of quiet respect that only comes from surviving together. As the day faded, music played low and slow. An old blues song drifted through the air, wrapping around the laughter and the hum of clippers still buzzing inside. Malik watched a few of the teenagers tossing a football in the street. One of them, the same boy from months ago, waved. Malik waved back. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but to him it meant everything, because he knew that somewhere in that kid's mind a seed had been planted, a new definition of strength, a new model of manhood. When the sun finally dipped below the rooftops, Malik took a long breath, the air cool and clean. He looked around, the shop, the street, the mural in the distance, and realized something. He'd come home from war years ago, but this was the first time he actually felt peace. Not because the world had changed entirely, but because he had. He'd turned anger into armor, pain into patience, injustice into inspiration, and in doing so, he'd become something even stronger than undefeated. He'd become untouchable. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers. And in that whisper, you find the kind of power no man can take. The peace that only comes when you know who you are. Because they can mock your silence. They can doubt your calm. But they can never undo the strength that stands behind it. The barbershop never sounded the same again. The echo of that day, the snipping shears, the nervous laughter, the hum of clippers, now carried a different kind of silence. Not the comfortable pause between jokes, but the silence that comes after a truth too big to ignore. It was a week after the fight. The bruises had faded, but the memory hadn't. Malik still came in early to sweep the floor, but this time, his steps were slower. Each stroke of the broom dragged like he was clearing away ghosts. The shop had become a place of whispers, of guilt, shame, and quiet realizations. Tyrone didn't return for a few days. When he did, he didn't bring his swagger or his loud voice. He came in wearing an old hoodie, hands buried deep in his pockets, looking like a boy who'd seen something he couldn't unsee. He sat in Malik's chair without saying a word. The mirror reflected two men, one still standing tall, the other learning what that meant. Malik didn't speak either. He just adjusted the cape around Tyrone's shoulders and began to work. The sound of the clippers filled the space, a slow and steady hum. Then, finally, Malik spoke. "You know," he said quietly, "respect isn't about who you can beat. It's about who you can learn from." Tyrone nodded, eyes fixed on the mirror. He didn't argue, didn't smirk, just nodded, the way a man does when something finally sinks past pride and hits the heart. When the haircut was done, Tyrone stood, pulled a few bills from his pocket, and laid them on the counter. But Malik shook his head. "Not today," he said softly. "Today it's on me." Tyrone looked at him for a long time before walking out, leaving the doorbell to chime behind him, a sound that carried the smallest hint of peace. Outside, the neighborhood felt different too. The kids who used to laugh at Darius now waved when he passed by. The men who'd once mocked him started coming by the gym, asking for tips, pretending it was about fitness, but really looking for something else, something cleaner than ego. The story of the undefeated man at the barbershop spread beyond the block. People online called him the Black Rocky, the Silent Warrior, the 40-0 man. But Darius never commented, never fed the noise. He didn't care for fame. What mattered wasn't that people knew his record. It was that they understood why he fought. Because fighting wasn't just about fists. It was about identity. It was about walking into a world that still looked at your skin and made assumptions, and proving that dignity didn't need permission to exist. One evening, a news crew came by. They'd heard about the viral video, the one where the fight ended and Darius walked away, leaving the men frozen in silence. The reporter asked if he'd give a statement, maybe talk about what it feels like to be undefeated. Darius just smiled gently. "It's not about being undefeated," he said. "It's about not being broken." Then he turned to Malik, who stood in the doorway of the shop, and nodded toward him. "That man taught me that," he added. He's been cutting hair here for 20 years, and every day he faces something harder than any punch, ignorance, and still he shows up. The camera cut off a few minutes later. The segment aired once on the evening news, then vanished into the digital ether. But the people who saw it, really saw it, didn't forget. Weeks later, a young boy came into the shop with his mother. The boy looked nervous, clutching a flyer for the local boxing club. He looked up at Darius, who was sweeping the corner. "Are you the undefeated guy?" he asked shyly. Darius smiled, crouched down to the boy's level. "I'm just a man who learned when not to fight," he said. The boy nodded, his eyes wide. "Can you teach me that too?" Darius looked over at Malik, who gave him that knowing grin, the same one he'd worn the first day they met. "Yeah," Darius said softly. "Yeah, I can." The story didn't end with the punches. It ended with peace. But peace isn't quiet, it's earned. It's the sound of a man reclaiming his name, his dignity, his place. It's the sound of a community realizing that sometimes the strongest man in the room is the one who refuses to swing. Because racism doesn't always wear a hood or carry a slur. Sometimes it hides in laughter, in the subtle ways we measure each other's worth, and who we assume deserves respect. And the only way to dismantle it is to see it. That day at the barbershop, Malik saw it. So did everyone else. They saw how easy it was to mock what you don't understand, until truth stands up and looks you in the eye. So maybe that's the lesson we take with us tonight. That justice doesn't always wear a uniform. That heroism doesn't always roar. It stands calm and unshaken, in the middle of ignorance and refuses to kneel. Darius didn't win 40 fights in the ring. He won 40 chances to walk away from hate and still believe in tomorrow. And that's what undefeated really means. So if this story moved you, don't just scroll past. Stand for someone today. Because silence is what keeps injustice alive. But empathy, that's how we end it. If you believe that strength isn't just about fists, but about grace, hit like, share the story, and subscribe. Because the world doesn't change through anger. It changes when enough of us finally say, "I see you, I believe you, and I stand with you."